Welcome to Solo Ship Week 7. I'm Squirrel Patrol, joined by Jam DeWin from One Week Season. Jam, last week I had my number one correlation as Derrick Henry and Terry McLaurin. If you told me they were both going to get 2 touchdowns and I wouldn't have a great week, I would have been shocked. But I did not have enough of Tampa Bay and Chris Godwin and of course Sean Tucker. Most people didn't have Sean Tucker. But how was your week 6?
Yeah, it was. I had my first major sweat of the week. I had a roster with Chris Godwin and Bucky Irving and all the stuff that had hit early, and then Zay Flowers, Derrick Henry, and then it had Chuba, Deontay, Bijan, and Andy Dalton, and it had a clear path to first place in the flea flicker and the slant. It ended up finishing 38th and 82nd in those out of 20,000 and 60,000 entries, because Andy Dalton just decided to go turnover happy down the stretch. But fun to have a little sweat and keep knocking on the door. We'll get one of these, going to these big ones soon.
Yeah. So on to week 7, and it's a similar setup to last week where we have 10 games. I think it might be the third week in a row where we have 10 games and we have about 3 games with a higher total, 3 games with a bit. Point total of about 50-ish or above. I'm kind of ready to get hurt again because, last week I was focusing on those 3 higher total games and, particularly on the Washington-Baltimore game. And it was the Tampa Bay game against New Orleans that went crazy. I think that game had a total of 42, and I think Tampa Bay might have put up 50 points. And I think there was 70 total points. So it almost doubled its total. But I'm having a hard time again this week getting away from those 3 higher total games. We've got the Detroit-Minnesota game. We have Washington again and against Carolina. And then we have Seattle and Atlanta. And I guess in particular, what I'm noticing is I think, again, we're seeing the Atlanta-Carolina game is probably going to get the highest ownership just because if you start running some optimal lineups, you get some pairings from that game. You get a lot of Geno Smith, Drake London. But I don't know. I kind of had my eye on another game. I kind of like the Minnesota-Detroit game. What are your initial thoughts on the week?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that Minnesota-Detroit game is dramatically better than the Seattle-Atlanta game. And it's just a function of how these teams play. So, Minnesota-Detroit, they both force among the four highest opponent pass play rates over expectations. Teams don't try to run the ball against these teams. And Minnesota has led by a ton every game, right? So we haven't seen them in a neutral game script, but they still rank 4th in pass rate over expectation, just like last year when they had Josh Dobbs and they had Nick Mullins, right? They want to pass the ball. And so this should be a pass heavy game for Minnesota and Detroit. The thing that I don't like about and I'm not totally against that Atlanta-Seattle game, but the thing that excites me about the fact that people are going to overexpose themselves to it is Seattle forces the second shallowest average depth of target in the NFL. Atlanta forces the shallowest average depth of target in the NFL. So, Seattle's given up some explosives. Atlanta has not. They've given up the fewest pass plays of 20+ yards in the league. So they force teams to march the field, right? So it doesn't lend itself to a 38-41 type of game. And so we could get some good production from that one, but I'll be surprised if it develops into a game I guess I shouldn't say I'll be surprised, right? It takes one big play from DK Metcalf or Darnell Mooney at the start of the game to kind of ignite things and maybe open things up a little. But the likeliest scenario is that we get kind of one of these games where they both score in the 20s, maybe one team cracks 30, and the field's going to treat it as oh, this game could shoot out. And so I like spots like that, weekends like that.
We might have a short show this week then. We might just say Detroit, Minnesota. That's it. That actually seems fairly obvious to me, but I'm willing to look dumb, saying that. But I think Detroit and Minnesota allow the first and third most receptions per game in the NFL this season. You have 2 outstanding wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown. The other receivers in the game, and the other skill players in the game aren't terrible. Can get to any of them. I would probably avoid, have a tendency to avoid running backs against Detroit. And then Detroit is, just lost their best defensive player. for the rest of the season. The game's indoors. It's got a high total. Like, I don't know why we wouldn't get to this game. And I'm, just sitting there trying to get like Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown into my rosters. And it is absolutely possible to do that. You can't spend a ton of money. You're probably not having another big spend up on your roster, but it's absolutely possible to get Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown into the same roster. You've got a fair amount of like 6K type running backs you can go to. And then and if you drop down like Jameson Williams or like Jordan Addison or some other receiving part from this game, I think that's fine. But this game seems to have the best chance in my mind of seeing one of those like berserk scores where because both teams are just passing the ball and the clock stops and you're piling up receptions and we're getting either a half point or a point for those. So it just seems like the number one game environment to me.
Well, good show.
So that'll
get the ad reads in and get out of here. That's I'm calling that that block of Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm calling it the Minnesota penthouse of like find a way to pay up for both guys and figure it out from there. Last year those two combined for 62 and 68 points in these games. That was Nick Mullins was under center for those games. So I think it's a really sharp game to pay attention to. It's a really sharp way to play that game because people are going to play Justin Jefferson, it looks like, but people aren't going to play Amon-Ra St. Brown. So to me, the scenario is like, what if they both score 34? And what if nobody else on the slate tops 26, which could easily happen? And then like the Amon-Ra St. Brown rosters, they get 34 points at low ownership, but that doesn't matter because, Jefferson's getting 34 at high ownership. And then, Jefferson rosters are all competing against each other. It's like, if you get both those scores, how many people are getting both of them? I guess you and me, people listening to this, but yeah, so it just creates an opportunity for you to really move ahead of the field. So I like that. And to me, that's the game. And there are some others that I'll be dipping into, but like the bulk of my exposure is going to be there.
Yeah, so I guess I'll say just right before the show, I did actually manage to build a dummy roster that had Jaden Daniels with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Justin Jefferson. And, Jalen Coker, I think, is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that roster, right? Because, pretty short on price. But, it is possible to get in some pieces. In fact, I think by DraftKings and FanDuel rules, we're obligated to have at least 2 games in our rosters. We should, talk about the other games. I guess the Washington-Carolina game wouldn't shock me if we get, a player from that game on the winning roster. Chuba Hubbard is in a good spot. We're kind of waiting for Jonathan Brooks to come back, but it doesn't look like he's going to be back this week to, eat into Chuba's workload. I think he's probably the guy I'm most likely to get to from this game. But I, like Jaden Daniels as well. If you can fit in some Jaden Daniels. I probably am not as high on McLaurin this week, just because after getting 2 touchdowns and not really landing on the winning roster last week, it kind of turns me off a little bit. But, there are some cheap pieces. I don't mind getting like Zach Ertz. The opportunity cost at tight end isn't that high. Don't mind getting to Noah Brown. It's actually an interesting situation on DraftKings specifically where we might want to get Juju Smith-Schuster into our rosters, but he might be questionable. So you might need a 4K late afternoon pivot. But on the, what are your thoughts on the Carolina-Washington game?
Yeah, my big concern there, I was thinking, like on the surface, people are going to look at it and be like, man, this is like one of the best offenses in the NFL. They've had 2 games this year where they haven't punted. Are they going to have to punt in this one, right? Against this Carolina defense? This is crazy. You ready for this? So 5 games that Carolina's lost. In those 5 games, the QB plus RB1 plus wide receiver 1 against them combined for under 60 DraftKings points. And the other one, it was 77 points. It was the Bears. And these guys cost 20.8K if you put them all together, right? So you need like 80 plus points to keep you on a 200-point pace. Sub 60 points, you're not even on pace for 150. And the reason is because quarterbacks don't have to throw the ball against them. So in PPR scoring, you miss that opportunity for like just points to pile up. And then there have been 3 of these 5 games against Carolina. The RB2 on the opposing offense scored, had the same number of rush attempts or more rush attempts than the RB1. We saw it last week with Tyler Algier, right? So it's this situation where it's such an easy game for offenses that offenses aren't being able to get there in the box score. Like we want a competitive game to really get us there. So yeah, I think that this game's going to be overvalued, overrated by the field. And I don't have McLaurin in my pool, and I probably won't have Jaden Daniels in my pool. Cause like if if he goes for 25 or something, that doesn't scare me. What scares me is if he goes for 33, 35, 37, and lowest pressure rate team in the league. So how much he's going to have to scramble. And then he's, top 30 pass attempts once, and that was chasing points against Baltimore. So yeah, I think that's a game that is more interesting on the Carolina side for the fact they're going to have to chase points than it is on the Washington side for me.
Yeah, there should be like a word in German for a game where we expect one of the teams to put up a lot of points, but it's going to be a split backfield potentially. We don't know. It's going to come from the rushing game. I actually feel the same way about like Cincinnati and Cleveland. Like Cincinnati was a team, and I was looking at, this might be sneaky, but it might be a little bit too sneaky. Like, Jamar Chase can go nuts, but he probably doesn't need to in this game. And Cincinnati can probably just, run the ball and see if Cleveland can catch up. And this year, Cleveland's probably not able to catch up. And the Cleveland defense is still probably good enough that I don't really want to pick on them, even though they're losing games. It's it's really just a matter of the offense not being able to keep up. I guess the Cleveland does have some very cheap wide receivers as a result of Amari Cooper being traded, before, I guess, after pricing came out. I know, do you have, I guess, any favorites from Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, and David Njoku?
Yeah, I mean, Amari's like a legit number one wide receiver, and he's topped 10 DraftKings points once this year. So I think that if anybody's going to do it, and by do it, I mean like actually put up a score that matters that you didn't get it, it would be Jeudy. Njoku, Njoku. So I think that like a lot of the value, which by the way, there was news. Andy Reid said that Juju is questionable, but only like listed as that, like procedurally, that he's going to play this week. So we get Juju value. We get Trey Tucker value because Jacoby Myers is doubtful. See if that can burn us again. But yeah, like there's a lot of these tight ends that like provide better value than most of the sub 4K wide receivers. So from that standpoint, like Njoku is just as good as most of the sub 4K wide receivers. So yeah, like I won't argue against him, but he and Deshaun Watson are just not meshed, right? Like he's had really underwhelming production with Deshaun Watson. And that was even when Deshaun Watson was playing decently well, and like fantastic production with other quarterbacks, with Brissett, with Flacco. So, yeah, like Judy's the guy who can score 30. Is how I look at it. I don't think he will, but I don't want to totally overlook the potential for that. So, like a spot like that, I tend to have my exposure based on like what I want to do, which will definitely be underweight the field's exposure. But like, I'm not going to just fade him because he's popular and he's not a great play. It's like, I still see it. And so I could have him on like one of my single entry 3 max rosters and, like a small percentage of my MME play.
Yeah, I kind of see it the same way. Like if I end up with 4,800 or whatever the price tag is, then maybe like Jerry Jeudy is the guy that I'm going to go to at that price tag, but I'm not going to go out of my way to, put him in as a value play and then start building around him.
Yeah.
I think it's unlikely that any of the Cleveland guys makes a big splash. And the action continues at Splash Sports with their Week 7 $50,000 Survivor Revival Contest and the RG 10,000 Survivor Revival Contest. Now available in 34 states, Splash Sports is the ultimate platform for peer-to-peer fantasy and betting contests. Challenge the RotoGrinders experts at splashsports.com/RotoGrinders and use promo code ROTO10 to get a $10 credit when you join your first contest. I guess we should actually, probably touch on the Seattle-Atlanta game a little bit more, because I think that's a game that, people are going to be getting to in their rosters. I do think there's an interesting dynamic with the wide receivers. Drake London is probably going to be very popular, and I think it's interesting. I think he's about 6,900, and he's right around the same price as the running backs like Kenneth Walker and Bijan Robinson. If I'm using Drake London this week, I probably would prefer to use Kirk Cousins as the quarterback on that team. And if London does have a game that beats me, there's a good chance he needs a touchdown. So then, Kirk Cousins is getting the touchdown. I think if I'm not using Cousins as the quarterback in that roster, I think I'd much rather, drop down in price or drop up in price just a little bit, get either Kenneth Walker or Bijan Robinson, figuring that maybe they're running the ball, slowing the game down a little bit, although they're both, perfectly fine in the passing game as well. And I'm surprised that more people are not getting to Jackson Smith and Jigba. Atlanta actually does allow, I think, they're with Detroit and Minnesota, I think allowing in the top 5 receptions per game. And Tyler Lockett looks like he might be a little bit dinged up. I guess, your thoughts on your favorite plays from that game, even though it might not be your favorite game.
Yeah. So I don't think I'll have exposure to Drake London. And anytime I say something like this, like I'm for those of you watching, I'm talking through like what I feel like is most plus EV. So I'm not saying Drake London can't hit, but the fact that Seattle forces a shallow average depth of target, right? So Drake London already, he's not a guy who hits for explosives. He needs volume to pile up, and then his volume's not going to be like deeper downfield. So like Seattle's gotten hit for some big plays, which means like Darnell Mooney or Ray McLeod could hit for a big play. Drake London's not typically like a big play explosive threat. It's more a volume thing. So I'm not scared of getting buried by him, by Drake London rosters. On the flip side, early ownership projections is like Geno is kind of one of the more popular guys because he's only 5,800. He's got all these pass attempts. He's thrown for 284 plus yards 5 times, but then like very minimal ownership on DK Metcalf and JSN. And it's like, is everybody just doing Geno singles and hoping that they just get a safe cash game score? Like what's the plan here, right? Every game where DK Metcalf has had like a target count that you would want for him, JSN has also had a target count that you would want for him. Every game where DK Metcalf has had a lower target count, JSN's had a lower target count. Like I don't think people realize that they're kind of like a 1A, 1B in this offense right now. It's like when Geno's throwing a lot, both these guys see a lot of targets. They have games where they combine for 20, 24, and 30. So to me, it's Geno doubles if you play Geno. And then if you're not playing Geno on a roster, to me, I'm probably not going to have JSN or Metcalf on them because like it all wraps into the same bet to me because here's the crazy thing. Yes, Atlanta doesn't give up downfield throws and they force a shallow A-dot. They're also 27th or 26th, whatever it is, in drive success rate on defense. So the only teams worse than them are like Cincinnati, Arizona, Washington, Carolina, Las Vegas. That's like all the teams that we attack every week, right? Like Atlanta lets teams drive the field. So if Seattle can do it, it's just going to be like 50 pass attempts, 38 completions, and like maybe Geno pushes over 300 yards, but he probably doesn't. But just like all those pass attempts piling up to DK Metcalf and JSN, like that has a lot of value. So yeah, I mean, I think that the way to play it is different than the way the field's going to be playing it.
My thought process is I'm more inclined to use JSN on a roster that doesn't include like other pieces of this game, figuring that he can get there with receptions at his price. And if I'm using Geno Smith, maybe I want to like use DK Metcalf, figuring that Metcalf's more likely to get like the long touchdown that then is adding to Geno Smith's total, whereas JSN's maybe just getting some receptions. That's not really helping Geno Smith a lot, So like if Jackson Smith-Njigba gets a 8 reception, 80-yard game, like maybe that's enough on a roster at his price tag, but like Geno Smith might not necessarily have a great game. But like if DK Metcalf gets 120 yards and 2 touchdowns, then Geno Smith is probably going to be fine on that same roster.
Yeah, I could see I started the week looking at JSN as a one-off, and then when I got deeper into the research, it was like I'll just roll these guys only on Geno rosters, but I might come around and go back to JSN one-off territory. That's definitely where I started my week for sure.
So I guess at the quarterback position, it sounds like you're probably like interested in the Detroit Minnesota game. Are there, I guess, any other quarterbacks that you're interested in? A couple of guys that I was interested in. I thought they would be sneaky, but now I'm starting to hear them like mentioned as I review other content. I like the idea of going like Tyler Huntley and Anthony Richardson, figuring that they could be completely off people's radars and that they can put up big games. But if they're on people's radars, I maybe don't want to, I might have like 5%. And I think that there are large field, plays, not like single entry, not trying to beat like 500 people, trying to beat like 100-something thousand people. Thoughts on Richardson, Huntley, I guess like Tyreek Hill also,
Miami. I was going to ask you about Tyreek. Huntley's bad. You know what I mean? Like he's got 11 or 12 starts. He's never topped 232 passing yards, I think it is. He's never had a 100-yard wide receiver. Mark Andrews and Huntley had a good connection. But yeah, coming off the bye, I could see it, right? I think what I do when I'm writing up my interpretations for the NFL Edge is I'll put in just like initial exposures in the Bink machine, our optimizer, and I put in like 2% Tyler Huntley. Anthony Richardson actually, on Huntley, it's like, yeah, I'm going to take some home run swings in large field play. I I think I could play Richardson in smaller field, like single entry 3 max stuff, you know, because he's only finished 5 games in his career, which is crazy, but he's got like 21 and 27 and 30 in 3 of those 5 games. And Shane Steichen's just so good at figuring out how to use the pieces that he has. So yeah, I think that Anthony Richardson is more comfortable than Tyler Huntley, but yeah, like I usually have 10 to 13 single entry 3 max rosters, and I could see like 6 to 8 of them being around that Detroit Minnesota game, like maybe 6 Darnold and 2 Goff or something like that. But then like 4 or 5 reserved for opportunities to have like a Geno, 1 or 2 Genos, a Daniel Jones, maybe 2 Daniel Jones, and like an Anthony Richardson, something like that.
We'll hope Tyler Huntley is not listening to this show. Speaking of which, shout out to Old School 45 taking down the Week 6 Listener League. Don't forget to join in the fun each week with RG's Listener League and play alongside other viewers as well as your favorite hosts. You'll have a chance every week to compete for first place and win yourself a month of RG Combo Premium. Check our description for an invite to the contest when it goes live on Wednesday. Yeah, I initially I thought like, ooh, this is going to be sneaky. We can get Tyreek Hill into rosters. I don't know.
I think every sharp person has had that thought, and he's going to end up being like, there was a conversation like with Mike and Hilo and Xandamir and me yesterday in text, and Hilo and Mike were talking about that. And then Xandamir was like, he's like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to bump up our ownership projections on Tyreek Hill, because I think everybody's going to have that thought, you know?
I went into the expert survey to put him as my sneaky play, and he was like dotted. I think the expert survey is just dotted with like
12% owned, which like, can he hit? Yeah, but it's like the time to take the risk is when nobody's going to be on him. It's like he's probably not going to hit, and so if his ownership's high, then it just becomes an edge.
Yeah, I'd be more inclined to do it if it was a week where I was higher, maybe on the cheaper, or like higher on, I guess, like the cheaper running backs, right? Like I don't know there's enough value to like get Tyreek Hill and like Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And so like if I'm sitting there and I'm having to choose, like Tyreek Hill can absolutely take like a screen pass 80 yards.
Right.
But that's not going to pay off his price tag, and he's probably not going to do that twice. So I think he's going to be a player that I have to just kind of let burn me if he burns me.
Neighbors is 7,500. You know, like there's better ways to spend that salary. It's just like the edge is if nobody's on him, and now it seems like people will be on him.
Yeah. Actually, you know, that brings up exactly where I wanted to go next is, you know, we have an interesting game, you know, a inter-division NFC East, I guess, you know, divisional contest between, you know, the Giants and the Eagles. I want to play some Saquon Barkley. I'm probably going to run it back with Malik Neighbors. I don't know. But I don't know if that's something I would do in single entry, but I'm kind of torn on it. Because I think it's a you know, like Neighbors could do very well. Saquon Barkley is getting, you know, you've got a narrative there. But I don't know. I don't know if it's for single entry or for something I'll reserve for large field contests. Any thought on that game?
Yeah, I mean, it's a horrible matchup for Saquon. Giants really good run defense with Dexter Lawrence, and teams don't typically try to run on them. One of the best red zone defenses, but then at the same time, you know, Saquon's really good, and this is the type of team. Nick Sirianni did it with AJ Brown when he played Tennessee, and it was like nobody played AJ Brown against Tennessee. It was 2022. Nobody played him in that game because, you know, he'd had like one big game all year, and it was like, oh, he's so inconsistent. You don't know when the game's gonna come. And it was just like, but aren't they going to try to get him 2 touchdowns if they can? And they did. He put up, I think it was 34.9 DraftKings points in that game, and no one was on him, right? And so I think that the narrative angle on Saquon and the fact that he's a good player who's capable of, you know, explosive runs, that's enough to make him plus EV. I really like, I mean, similar to the Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I like Neighbors and AJ Brown together as well. So yeah, I like putting together some pairings from that game, and it's going to be like a step below for exposure the Minnesota stuff for me, but I'm going to have like that on some single entry 3 max rosters.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, we look at last week, and it was a game with a lower point total that kind of exploded beyond expectations. Also, a divisional game, you know, between Tampa Bay and New Orleans. You know, it's clearly maybe a different scenario, but yeah, actually, I kind of hadn't thought about AJ Brown as much, just because I couldn't get past the narrative with Saquon. Yeah. But that might be a sharper play for single entry, and then the large field you can do the Saquon Malik Neighbors. I do think Neighbors is interesting. I think Daniel Jones is actually a quarterback I'll probably get to in large field play. Just he has like rushing ability that people don't really think about as much, and now he's got like a real wide receiver one in Neighbors. I guess like speaking of wide receiver ones, Cooper Kupp is potentially going to be coming back. He's somebody that I want to be over the field on. I think we're showing like Kyron Williams with pretty high ownership, and I'm probably not going to get there. But I would actually be interested in Cooper Kupp. Like he's a guy, if he is playing the full game, like the 1 week where Puka was injured and Cooper Kupp wasn't, we really wanted to get to Cooper Kupp. now Cooper Kupp is coming back. Puka's still out, but he's kind of off people's radars. Any thoughts on Kupp and the Rams in general?
Yeah, I mean, I'm treating it like, maybe I'm wrong. I'm treating it like he's not going to see a full workload, but then also, why would they put him out there if he's not? Maybe they won't baby him. He had 21 targets that other game. And so, yeah, maybe it's more interesting than I was thinking. I don't have firm thoughts on it. My thoughts had been like, well, they're probably not playing him a full complement of snaps. But yeah, if they play him, why wouldn't they? So maybe it's a lot more interesting than I was thinking. Along those same lines, what about Nick Chubb? 6K, no Jerome Ford. And my thought is like, I mean, he had a devastating knee injury, but also you're like, we see it all the time. They're like, oh, we're gonna ease him back in. But then even if they play him 30 snaps, they give him 20 touches because they're like, well, when he's in there, we don't want to give him empty snaps. Like, let's use him. So any thoughts on that one? He's only 6K, right? We're trying to save salary at running back.
Well, that is interesting. I assumed he was more expensive because he historically hasn't caught a lot of passes. So he's
right.
Historically, he's been a guy
always overpriced. Yeah.
Yeah. And like Derrick Henry, right? Where I don't like to get to him as much as the field does usually because he doesn't catch passes. At 6K, he doesn't need to catch passes. and that Cincinnati defense has been accommodating this year to opposing offenses. And he's going to be the home running back for a team that maybe doesn't want to throw the ball and just lost their number one wide receiver. Yeah, that's a really interesting play. I really like that thought because he's not going to project well. You can't possibly project him to get the full workload. So nobody's going to project him like that, and they're not even going to see him.
And he's leverage off of popular, potentially bad chalk too.
Yeah. No. Yeah. That's a really interesting play.
All right. We both helped each other. We both contributed something to each other. You know what I was hoping for?
Roster. Yeah.
Now I'll mention it just on the off chance Brian Robinson misses because it looks like he's going to play. But Eckler and McNichols cost 10.3K combined, and RB1 plus RB2 against the Panthers in these 5 Panthers losses have scored. The worst game was 29 points. The second worst was like 34 points, and 2 games have been 40 plus. It would have been like, or will be if Brian Robinson happens to miss, like the all-time smash 2 running backs from the same team that nobody's going to play on a week with no running back value, and it opens up the rest of your roster in a way that nobody else is playing their rosters. But I don't think we'll get that. And then we end up with like basically a 3-headed backfield because like with the knee injury, I don't think they want to override Brian Robinson. No, like Bijan's score last week was the best score against the Panthers because RB1s just get taken out eventually against the Panthers. But then I don't think they want to ride Eckler too hard because they want to keep him fresh for the season. So it's like I think all 3 guys are going to get run, and McNichols is going to get like the last quarter's worth of touches, but maybe not enough to actually be viable or valuable. I do think there's a chance that you compare McNichols' salary to those 4K tight ends, 4K wide receivers, and if he gets 12 touches, he could be as good of or better play, but way less exciting if Brian Robinson plays, which he's now expected to.
It's an interesting thought though, because that's another one of those afternoon games, and we might want to be making sure we're paying attention, around the 3:00 time frame, because like I get caught up in the games as well. Like they start 1 p.m. and I start watching the games, and I forget to even check the inactives unless I'm really thinking about it for the afternoon games. But we might want to save some roster spots and save some salary because we might want to be switching some things around depending on who's questionable. There's a pile of players, it feels like, in these 4 p.m. games that are expected to play or they're listed questionable, but we think they're going to play, but one of them could end up being out, and then we're going to want to have roster spots to potentially switch to. Like, if Brian Robinson is out, then Eckler and McNichols become interesting for building our rosters. Speaking of which, introducing Combo Lite, our newest product, gives you the power of simulation for a fraction of the price of other tools. Competitors charge hundreds a month for their sim products. Combo Lite is just $39.99. It includes our SimLabs lineup building tool, plus content from some of your favorite DFS analysts. Combo Lite doesn't limit you to one sport either. It includes SimLabs access to the four most popular sports: MLB, NFL, NBA, PGA. You won't find a more cost-effective option anywhere. So we managed to stretch out that potentially 2-minute show to the half hour. I will still say that I'm feeling probably strongest about the Minnesota Detroit game. The player I probably feel strongest about is Justin Jefferson. And then I'll pair him with Amon-Ra St. Brown in some rosters. Jameson Williams, maybe Jahmyr Gibbs in other rosters, and I think some Sam Darnold and Justin Jefferson without a run back is even conceivable. But yeah, I guess any closing thoughts on the week?
Yeah, one guy we didn't really get to touch on, but Brock Bowers is if you just took off position name and compared him to like the 6K to 7K running backs and wide receivers, he'd be one of the best plays of that bunch, and he's 5,800. So I think he's interesting, and also I think the 2 tight end rosters are interesting this week because Bowers plus Kelsey will be rare. I don't think Kelsey can go for 25 plus, but he can go for 15 to 18, and if he does get a touchdown, he can get there. And then like if the best salary savers end up being tight ends, then like Bowers plus one of those is an interesting way to go.
Yeah, actually, if Juju does miss, and I guess he's expected to play, but I was thinking I was maybe more interested in Kelsey if Juju missed, because then they're really down again in the receiving game. Could be a 2 tight end week. We could have some real value plays at the tight end position. So that could be a way to go. And I am high on Bowers. I think he's the only tight end I would maybe go out of my way.
Yeah.
With Kelsey. So that'll wrap it up for this week of Soloship, and we'll see you guys next week.